Origin Chance Home UX, and this is why didn't the USA annex all of Mexico in 1848? Short and documentary by the channel History Matters. In 1846, a war kicked off between the US and Mexico, which the United States won. In the peace settlement, Mexico lost its northern territories, but there were Americans who pushed for the total annexation of all the Mexico and United States. Okay, first of all, I didn't even know long ago, when I was a kid, I didn't even know that USA took parts of Mexico. And whenever I heard of the city, not city, whenever I heard of the New Mexico, which is a state, when I heard of the New Mexico, I'm like, that must be part of the Mexico, right? So there was always confusion when there was a certain TV shows that were based around New Mexico, and I'm like, okay, this is, I guess, the country of Mexico. That's interesting. But then later on, I realized that holy shit, there is a state called New Mexico, right? Because I always assumed, like, first of all, I didn't even know that it was a state. Whenever I heard in New Mexico, I thought, like, this must be a city in Mexico. First of all, it's a state, and that's, I guess, capital city is Santa Fe, if I remember correctly. But yeah, that was really confusion. But then later on, when I started to, get interested in history more and more, I realized that, okay, USA took a lot of part of Mexico. Otherwise, lots of areas, like, I guess, including California and shit, wouldn't be part of USA. So USA wouldn't look like how it looks right now, which is like a, this kind of a, square thing. It would have been weirdly drawn out. But yeah, so, first of all, only reason I can think of the new whole Mexico wasn't taken by USA is it could be the USA didn't have the capability at the time, right? Lots of people don't realize it, but you can't just conquer shit and take over, right? First of all, you need resources to, I guess, control the area to begin with, right? So that could have been one of the reasons why they didn't take all of the entire Mexico. And it shows here that, there was a, agreement between two, right? So it could have been like, there would have been like a guerrilla threat, right? If they reach an agreement, I guess things can calm down a bit. But if they take entire Mexico, there would be a threat of constant internal wars, right? I don't know. These are the things that are coming to my mind. Because 1848, USA wasn't the USA that we know of today, right? So there could have been lots of shortcomings there. I'm pretty sure they thought of that, like, let's take entire Mexico. I'm pretty sure they thought of that. But I guess, they couldn't control it. That's the only thing I can think of. Yeah, let's watch it. History Matters is a great channel. I like reacting to this. It's like, I know of a lot of history in recent time is probably because of this channel. Because I don't need to react to like 30 or 40 minutes video. In just 3 or 4 minutes, they just tell me. And it's great. And they weirdly, include all the points that are important in that short period of time, which is a skill in itself. So yeah, that's what you're doing.
1848, after defeating Mexico in a war, the United States annexed these territories from it. And there were many notable individuals in the US that weren't happy at simply taking these lands. In fact, they wanted to manifest destiny the entirety of Mexico. Of course, they never did, but given how thoroughly the US won the war, this does raise a question. Why didn't the US take all of Mexico? So the war started after the US annexed Texas and the new borders between the United States and Mexico became unclear. The Texans, and thus now the Americans, claimed the border to be here, whereas the Mexicans said it was here. Both sent troops, and after a small skirmish, the US declared war. The Americans won the war handily, and so when it was time to make peace, President James K. Polk had a dilemma. Just how much land should they take? Polk had been elected on a promise to expand the United States territorially. The war with Mexico had been contentious domestically, and there were several areas of disagreement. The first was slavery. Mexico had abolished slavery over a decade before the war. But if territory was taken from it, then its status as either a slave state or a free state wouldn't be clear. Those in the South wanted a place for the practice to expand to, and if all of Mexico could be turned into slave states, then its future would be secure. Polk was himself pro-slavery, but given that his party had just lost the midterms and the House was now controlled by the Whig Party, he had to compromise. The second issue was that Mexicans were seen as different. There were many US politicians...
What the fuck? I mean, yeah, kind of interesting to think, right? I mean, the southern states kind of knew that they are being overpowered by the numbers. So I guess if they take entire Mexico and expand that into a slave states, when the time comes of the friction, right? It could be like, okay, it's like a 50-50 or more than like 60-40 or something. So there would have been a chance that slavery wouldn't have abolished because of the difference in size. I don't know. But yeah, I guess they thought of that in advance. Holy shit, that's something. And obviously, the demographics would have been an issue too, right? I'm trying to think, like, imagine if entire Mexico was part of USA. Would the border issue exist then? I'm sure the border issue would just shift at that point. There would be a border, right? So the border issue would just shift at that point, but I don't know.
Who worried about a sudden influx of Spanish-speaking non-white Catholics upsetting life there. The third issue was one of practicality. Polk had promised a quick war against an inferior enemy which would give Americans lots of free land. As the war had dragged on and American troops had to move further and further into Mexico, even occupying its capital, this was no longer the case. As such, incorporating all of Mexico would have led to a long and expensive guerrilla war. Those on the opposing side, including future President James, I guess it's okay if you secede Buchanan, wanted all of Mexico. Their arguments were that the US could handle any insurgency similarly to how they had handled the Native Americans before this. They also argued that all of Mexico should be annexed on financial grounds. Mexico's northern territories were somewhat barren, whereas the south was much more arable and would allow the US Navy access to southern ports, further expanding its reach. It was also believed that annexing all of Mexico would make up for the cost of the war. So why did the lesser annexation plans win out? Well, it was mostly down to a man called Nicholas Trist. Trist was sent to negotiate a peace settlement and Polk had ordered him to obtain these territories. Trist was largely seen as being too pro-Mexican by the army, and so Polk fired him. The problem was that Trist simply ignored him, and then negotiated a lesser settlement anyway. He did this because he opposed the war and didn't believe that America could be both a republic and an empire. He presented this lesser treaty to an unhappy president who just wanted everything over with at this point. Polk had hoped that this lesser treaty would be signed off by a hostile.
So I'm guessing Trist basically was in the field and saw like what was happening, right? And obviously he didn't want that this became like a Roman Empire 2.0 or something, where it just expands and slowly from republic to empire it becomes, right? So yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what he thought. Like, it can't be republic and empire together. And obviously he thought the war would just drag on, one thing after another. USA eventually would try to take over countries in the southern part of the continent slowly. So I don't know. I'm thinking that must be his mentality. But like I said, guerrilla warfare was a concern, because of course it is, right? That's the case everywhere. When you try to take something, you need to take account for that. Like, is it going to be a friction there? Because simply taking over a place doesn't mean shit, right? If the locals are too angry with you, there would be guerrilla warfare.
House. This worked, and despite most Americans actually wanting more of, but not all of Mexico, America only annexed this. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and a special thanks to my patrons, James Bisonet, Kelly Moneymaker, Sky Chappelle, Caution.
Damn, okay. So that is interesting. I didn't know about the slavery part, that they wanted it to become, obviously southern state wanted to become a major slavery states, all those, like, imagine California would be a slave state. That would be fucking ridiculous. But if they had taken over Mexico, and if they had succeeded in making it a slave state, I'm not saying slavery wouldn't have abolished, but I think it would have taken time, right? It wouldn't have taken a long time. I guess the outside pressure later on, or maybe the world wars would have forced or something. I don't know. But there you go. Alright people, that was why didn't the USA annex all of Mexico in 1848 by the channel History Matters. If you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.